QuickBooks Online updates first. And the place I'm going to begin is negative deposits. So every single update that we get is usually because there's been some request for it. I think about this negative deposits feature is going to be for use cases if you are using some type of point of sale, if you've got a restaurant, if you've got e-commerce. And so the need for being able to go and add negative deposits is maybe because you have negative sales for that day. And the way that that can result is, here's an example of a Shopify finance summary. And, you know, if I've got a client who they've got Shopify account and they have so many sales for this day of $135, but then they had more returns than they had sales, that's going to result in a negative deposit. There's lots of different ways to handle negative deposits, but now we have an additional negative deposit transaction functionality in QuickBooks. I'm going to take you through maybe what some of you do as traditional, and that would be going over into QuickBooks and maybe creating a journal entry to take all of the data that comes off of that financial summary and then pull it into QuickBooks. But if I go back over to this financial summary, you can see I've got multiple different lines here. And if you're somebody who wants to be able to take this summary and post it over into QuickBooks, then you're going to want to still continue some of these traditional routes, which would be to either create this journal entry of the sales in that channel, and then that channel's refunds minus any taxes that are going to be refunded, and then also discounts. And then you're going to have this result of a negative deposit. So this is one way that's pretty traditional. There are some of you out there who are going to create a sales receipt. And with that sales receipt, same thing, you're just parking in that you've got negative activity and you've got a $0 sales receipt. This new method isn't going to generate as much information on a report. So that's why I want to show you these two first traditional methods for creating a summary of the sales channel activity, because here's where you would be able to look at your report. So I took my sales summary from, in this case, an e-commerce Shopify channel, and created that journal entry. And then here I can see all of that activity on my profit and loss. If you are somebody who wants to use this negative sales transaction, you're going to miss some of these details. And what I mean by that is, if you come over and you record a bank deposit that's negative, you don't have all of the lines accessible to you to post to these multiple different accounts like you would in either journal entry or a sales receipt. But nevertheless, this is a new functionality. And again, it's brought to you because there's these requests that have happened. So you can go over inside of the bank deposit screen and you can now create a negative deposit. And you can post to whatever account is appropriate. So maybe you've got a clearing account and you are recording your sales receipt or your journal entry some other way, but now you're just doing the clearing of that account to post to the bank account. You know, there's several different reasons why I can see somebody who might need this negative deposit screen, but instead of being dependent on a journal entry like previously or a sales receipt, now you can go straight to the bank deposit and you can post a negative deposit. I'm curious how many of you out there have needed to have a negative deposit, and if you don't mind sharing why, I think that would be interesting, because this is a new functionality, and if I pull in like where I might use it, it's going to go back to the restaurants, the point of sale, e-commerce. And so that's where my brain goes. But maybe you've got another scenario where you're needing to create a negative deposit, and that actually might help the rest of us to think about use cases for when you might want to have a negative deposit. I see that there's several different chats, answers over here, questions. Would this work with PayPal as well? So if you're going to create a bank deposit that would be negative for PayPal, where I've got my posting account chosen as my bank checking account. Instead, you could use your PayPal account. So yes, I would say. The next one is, Marty, can't you just use the negative deposit screen to capture all of the same info on the journal entry? No, you actually can't pull in all of those various different lines. It doesn't allow for you to create this as a posting entry for sales. And this would not be the screen that I would use. But in that case, maybe you could go over, Marty, and you could put in all of the different lines. I would just think of a journal entry or a sales receipts being the place to do this. Tanya, what are you saying here? So have needed this for a long time for refunds that drive through from vendors. Okay, so here's a reason. So refunds from vendors needing to be able to put a negative deposit. Debbie, you're saying negative deposits when refunds for the day are greater than the sales. Yes. Okay. So lots of you coming up with similar responses and use cases. And we've got Murph, who is here as a special treat. And I see he's also answering some of these Q&A and even chat. So thank you, Murph. The other thing that's pretty cool about this feature is you can also tie into your bank feeds. So if you're somebody who utilizes bank feeds most often, if you were to create your deposit, so I'm going to come over here and I'll pull in my live QuickBooks. And so here is my deposit and my activity, and I post this transaction. So I save and close. If I come back over into my banking center, I will be able to see here's that deposit that was created. And although it's going to come through in your spent category column, sorry, you're going to be able to see that there is a match back to that deposit. So it was able to find that transaction, even though it was a negative deposit. So those are kind of some good to know about this functionality. I'm going to go back over to slides and then advance some more. And you do have copies of these slides. Gary was uploading it as a PDF inside of chat, and then also they'll be available later as Gary was sharing. The next thing I want to talk about is categorization history. This was a quick ad that happened. If you're like me, it might have slipped past you that you have this new functionality when you are in the bank feeds. So you have some slides that will take you through it. But again, I'm going to come over to QuickBooks and let's go into an actual demo file and I can show you what this looks like. So if you're somebody who has a lot of transactions and you're using the same vendor over and over, or it could be customer over and over again, and you want to look at how did you previously post that transaction, or maybe there's multiple team members and you want to be able to see how other team members have been posting. Maybe you're taking over the books or you have a new client and you want to see how did they code a transaction and you don't quite yet have rules set up. You can see this new categorization history. But it does require you to first have a vendor in place. So if I remove the vendor, I'm not able to see the categorization history. Makes sense, but just kind of one of those to call out. And while you've got that up, I'll pull up the screen that shares what it looks like. So that way I can help people who are answering. So I've highlighted the answer. How's that?
All right, we'll go ahead and close this out. Do you want me to share the results?
Sure.
All right.
12 months. Okay. That, you know what that tells me is that 50% here already know about this feature and aware of what kind of dates range is pulling in. So for those of you who do know, then congratulations, you got that polling question correct. For those of you who this is something that slipped past you and you haven't quite yet got a chance to dive into the functionality, let me share here what you're able to do. So you can sort by most used or last used. If you've got a really long list, then maybe you would want to see most often used. And in this case, I can actually see I've got 2 different times that this transaction has been coded to different accounts. So I can actually see I've got 3 different transactions that are coded to repairs and maintenance, and I've got 1 transaction that's coded to cost of goods sold. So maybe what we've got is 3 different times that people went to Lowe's. It was because we were doing repairs to the office. And then maybe 1 time that we went to Lowe's, it was because we were doing a customer job. So those are going to be some scenarios where you'd want to look at the history. You've actually got it here available to you, and you can create a rule at the same time. So I would say that's kind of a bonus. If you're here and you're already looking at this transaction, then go ahead and create that rule. So then next time it's even easier as you're moving through. And it hates those little apostrophes, doesn't it? So I can pull in my rule, and now I wouldn't even have to come back and look at that previous history. I could pull in my bank rules and rely on those. So you've got slides that's going to also help you with going through each of those different steps. How do you see it? How do you view it? In this case, we're looking at square space and what's the history been for that particular vendor. Another area that some are seeing, but others are not yet, is the images that are being auto-fetched inside of your bank feeds. And this is going to work with not only checks, but it will also work for deposits if your bank has this functionality to export those images to QuickBooks. I can tell you it's odd what I'm seeing here. The banks that have this functionality are not the big banks that you would assume. So I'm not seeing this with Chase. I'm not seeing this with Wells Fargo. Instead, I'm seeing this with the little banks. I've got lots of clients that sometimes you can only see the check images, and then other times you can only see the deposits. And then I've got some cases where you can see both. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like. And then that gives you kind of an alert to look for it in your clients to see which of your clients has this fetching ability. So if I come over and I show you the experience, this first one that I'm showing is a check. So I've got a client here that I'm looking at, and what has been fetched automatically is the check image front and back. So you can see whenever I'm looking at a bank feed, if I click on that line, I can see more detail. And if there is an image, there's a drawer that pops up. And inside that drawer, you can choose to see, the front of that check. You can see the clearing of that check by looking at the back of the image. A couple of other things you could do is, if you don't want this image to be imported to QuickBooks, right there where it says receipts next to attachments, you can actually remove those. One of the other things I want to call out here is this is not a regular attachment. These are called bank attachments. So until you post them into QuickBooks, you're not going to be able to go over into our attachments area and see these transactions. Because these are bank attachments, they won't live inside of QuickBooks unless you go ahead and accept them. There's a couple of other things that I want to point out too with using these images. If there is a match, it's not going to bring in the images. Again, it's because these are bank images, bank attachments, and not our regular attachments. I don't know if that's going to be changed later on because this is new functionality, but right now it's just one of those things to be aware of. If you're adding a brand new transaction that has not been posted into QuickBooks, this is the experience you're going to get. You'll see the drawer, you can see both of the images. You can actually click on the zoom to full screen option, so that way you can see full screen, the front, and then you can even see the back of that image. So these are nice to have, and the same thing is true for deposits. So if you're somebody who maybe has a client and they handwrite their deposits. You never know what's part of that batch. If you're working with somebody who has a bank that can import these images, then you're going to have access to it. So huge win there. The only thing is, I would say again, if you're somebody who has invoices inside of QuickBooks and received payments, you're going to want to go ahead and create that batch. And so instead of being able to add all of these images, you're going to have to, what I've done, download them. This is kind of like a crazy workaround, but you can download them and you can put them in attachments, and then that way you can then attach them to that transaction. But if you match, you're not going to have these images. So just kind of an FYI, but you do have all images visible. So I can see my client's deposit slip. So I do have those details. And if I am adding that transaction, you can inside that transaction see all of those attachments. And here again, that does call them bank attachments, which are slightly different than our regular attachments. I'm going to come over here and look inside of chat to see if there are any questions, or over into Q&A. Can you share the best banks that work with this bank feed? So Jennifer, it's my local little banks that I'm seeing this. I think it's odd, but you know, a lot of those banks that I struggle with, sometimes getting an accountant only user because they're small, or I struggle with the bank feeds being able to update automatically without hitting that update button inside of QuickBooks Online. So it's kind of a random thing. Penelope, love your name. Did you say there was a way to keep the images inside of QuickBooks Online? So what would happen is once you accept or once you add the bank feed with those images, yes, you can go over into your traditional attachments area of QuickBooks, and you would be able to see those bank images that are now considered attachments. So that is one way to do it. I think that, you know, my good friend Esther, one of the things that she was talking about was she's actually adding the bank feed transaction, and that way she's got all of the images that are inside of QuickBooks Online as attachments, and then she's removing the bank feed and then going back over to that transaction and then adding the attachments, so that way she's got them. I hope that this is just a temporary thing where whenever you match, you don't have the attachments, but otherwise, yes, they are visible. Christine, when will we see this new feed? So this is live. So if your bank or your client's bank has this, you'll be able to see it live. I've got probably about 12 different clients that do have this functionality. So it's definitely out there and live. Let's see. Any other questions? Keith, so you can only see the images when you don't have a match. Correct. Is this available in Canada? I don't know. That would be great. If somebody knows the answer to that, I would assume the answer is yes, because I think that both Megan and Esther are using this functionality. So I'm going to jump out on a limb there and I'm going to say yes, because both of them are Canadian pro advisors. And then Terry, you're saying, can we keep the images? So yes, Terry, if you're adding the transaction for the first time, those images are going to be added to QuickBooks as attachments. If you would prefer to have a match, once you add that transaction, you will have all of those attachments available inside of QuickBooks. So what some of our pro advisor buddies are doing is then deleting that bank feed ad and then going back to the correct transaction that they want to match to, and then they're uploading all of those attachments. Kind of a weird back and forth. Yeah, I agree with you, Lee. You're saying, hey, it's such a challenge to go back and forth. I agree. It's nice to be able to see it inside of QuickBooks. I would imagine that this functionality is going to grow Lots of people know that QuickBooks Online for their bank feeds is, awesome. So anything that can happen to benefit people who are using bank feeds, I would say is going to be an enhanced feature that's going to continue to have updates.